Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome everyone. For those of you who came during this visit, welcome. Did anyone, again, is there anyone here for the first time? Oh, hi. What's your name? Vladimir, welcome. So we will introduce ourselves, say your name, if you're comfortable. I encourage you to also share your personal pronoun, he, she, they, them, whatever you would like to be referred to when other people are speaking about you. And then I'll introduce the sisters. I'm David, he, him.
I'm Shantan. My name is Michael, he, him.
I'm Joe, he, him.
I'm Joe too, he, him.
Tom. Bob.
My name is Jerry, he, him.
Jeff, he, him.
I'm David.
I'm Clint.
I'm Larry.
My name is Ray.
My name is Matthew, he, him.
I'm Vladimir. My name is Stephen.
I'm Greg.
I'm Jack.
George.
Lynn, she, her.
I'm Pat.
I'm Diane.
Kevin.
I'm Brad.
I'm Mike.
I'm Marty.
My name is Joe.
Jay.
Jim.
Jim.
Samuel.
My name is Henry.
My name is Christian.
Otto. Grisha.
Thanks everybody, and welcome again. And welcome Sister Mary Media and Sister Mary Peter. I'm going to introduce you all, okay? You ready?
Give it a shot.
So, Sister Mary Peter is a poet and writer and a former sex worker whose lifelong activism focuses on HIV and AIDS, queer youth rights, and social justice. Their efforts include partnerships to provide street-level health services for sex workers, legal aid for LGBTQ people, refugees, and resistance to police violence. I'm sorry, I'm reading my handwriting too. Welcome, sister. And Sister Mary Media is a long-standing member of this Sangha and is also one of the original sisters of the order, founded in 1979.
When I was 3.
And for the sisters right now, also served as the mistress of grants. And she speaks often about the history and the work and her own vocation as a secular nun. So welcome both of you, and thank you for being here. It's great.
So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's always an honor to sit with you. I keep waiting for lightning to strike, but so far, so good. We titled today's Dharma talk, Fuck Coping, as a bit of a nod to the rage and coarseness of this present moment. But also because Mary Media and I have talked a lot. We sit and we work together. We wanted to call our attention to our position in front of that coarseness and that anger, and our response and our participation in it. So if you're okay with that, we want to just share a little bit of our reflections on that with you, and then we really want this to be a conversation because we're all practicing together, and we need each other now more than ever. So, fuck coping, because at least for many people since the election, but for many others for generations, our position in this culture has been one of conflict and threat and oppression. And sometimes people look at Buddhism as a way to cope with that, a way to protect ourselves and deal with the stress and the anxiety and the tension and the pressure of this age. And while that's okay, we also are mindful that we live in this capitalist culture. A friend said, end stage capitalism sucks. That's when the power cuts happen and the infrastructure falls apart and the 1% become the 0.01%. And the pressure just becomes even more intense. And that's because we are living in a system of oppression. And that system, capitalism, likes to commodify everything and exploit everything and turn everything into a mechanism, a technique, something to purchase and practice and refine, but not something to question or to sharpen our attention or to call focus on the system which is causing all of this crap. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what is mindfulness in the era that a lot of people talk about mindfulness. A lot of corporations now offer mindfulness training. Schools offer mindfulness courses. Lots of people out there are mindfulness gurus all of a sudden. It's like yoga in the 80s and aerobics. Everybody has the right mat and the right bowl and the right Buddha and the right way. To do what, though? So this term mindfulness, it's like McDonald's. Those hamburgers and french fries, they smell really good, and for a moment they taste really fabulous, and they satisfy. And then in the long term, they're going to kill you. And they're going to kill the planet. And that's perfectly fine, because the people who set it up today are making a little coin on that. So this is the position in which we're starting the conversation. We want to, in a way, reclaim the mindfulness that is practiced in this Sangha and see it as what it is meant to be, an agent of liberation and transformation, a way to focus our consciousness, a way to build our community, a way not just to cope, but to thrive and perhaps to overthrow and to transform. And I'm a young nun compared to Mary Media. But
soon to change my name to Sister Mary Mesozoic.
But I asked Mary if she would speak a little bit as a member of the Sangha, but also as a pillar sister, a founder sister, about how actual mindfulness impacted our order. Some of you know the sisters as clowns because we are, and fabulous creatures of the buffet matinee at the senior center, which we are. But also, we're really activists trying to be a leaven in the community, raising awareness and justice and change. And in my own practice, and certainly in Mary Media's history with the sisters, mindfulness has been an important part of that. So we'd like to start the conversation with Mary sharing that experience, and then we'll bring it back, and we'll have this kind of interchange if we can. So, still okay with everybody?
Sure.
All right.
Okay, so maybe a little bit of just background on how the sisters got started. So, I mean, and my own journey into the sisters, as Matthew knows, I made my way to San Francisco as part of the vast migrations of gay people in the mid-'70s when all the tops moved to New York and the bottoms came to San Francisco. And so here I found like-minded people. And I guess as a child of the 60s, I was politically active back in Canada. And there was the anti-war movement, there was the women's liberation movement, and the beginnings of the gay movement. And I came to San Francisco because this is where a gay culture was being formed, and I wanted to participate in that. I didn't want to be watch it from the other side of the border. I wanted to engage in the process of building that culture. And in the 60s, you know, with the political dissent and the radical left politics, especially in Quebec, I never felt comfortable with the kind of formulation that liberation comes from the barrel of a gun. And what I felt when I first engaged Buddhism, it was a promise of liberation. So it was liberation in a much broader sense that really resonated in deeper parts of myself than just wanting to be an activist. So I came to San Francisco, and somehow or another I had the good fortune to hear about the Harry Hayes' first Radical Fairy gathering, which took place on the Labor Day weekend of 1979, at an ashram in the desert of southern Arizona, presided over by Swami Bill. And it was a place where people from around the Bay Area and around the country actually came together and experienced for us the first sense that there is such a thing as a queer consciousness. Harry has a whole theory about gays having a separate way of experiencing the world, having a separate consciousness from the heteronormative consciousness in which we are bred. And as opposed to the formulation that gays are just the same as everybody else except for what we do in bed, Harry's formulation is we're different from everybody else except for what we do in bed. And so that really resonated with me, and it was kind of mind-blowing. So a group of us who, when we got back to San Francisco, wanted to take this sort of radical understanding, this radical critique of the culture out into the world. And how do we do that? So Agnes, one of the people who had been to the fairy gathering, was having dance classes. Well, come and let's do it through dance. And he was let's move together and communicate on a sort of non-verbal level. And so that was a bonding experience to be in those classes with the other radical fairies. And then, okay, so we're experiencing this, we're feeling this connection to each other, and how do we take this out into the community? Well, some of us did some drag as nuns a little earlier this year, and we got fabulous reactions, so we could do something like that. Why don't we start an order? Well, at the time, San Francisco had a program called the Costume Bank, where if you were a theater company, a nonprofit theater company, they would make the costumes for your production. So Agnes got us costumes, and that got the city of San Francisco to make our first habits. So it's like, yes, we're in the right city. They provide you with drag. So that's sort of how in a nutshell, the origins. It was a way to take this new experience of being in the world, or a new understanding of the way we are in the world, and take it out into the community in a way that was playful, that was performative, that was attention-getting, and of course the reaction in the community was immediately it gives people permission to engage in their own playfulness and their own make-believe. It's like the hunky bodybuilder just turns into a little Catholic schoolgirl who needs some discipline. Sister, I've been bad. Okay. So And so once we had the order, then, we can draw on the whole iconography of nuns, and it just sort of manifested forward from there. One of the important things that we did do when we manifested as a group was several of the people who were in the early sisters were meditation teachers. So they taught the group to meditate. And we would generally, before a manifestation out in the community, we would meditate together. And I think that informed, that spiritual bonding and that grounding kind of informed the way in which we were perceived and the way we manifested out in the world. So that's, in a nutshell, a connection between the connection between liberation and queer consciousness.
And then several decades later, my generation of sisters came along into an order that had lost meditation, that had lost many sisters, and that was struggling. And there were moments when I first arrived in San Francisco, like Mary Media, I'm from Toronto, and have been a nun for 34 years now. When I came here, it was very hard for me to integrate into the sister community. I felt like we were basically a bunch of shallow drag queen usherettes, standing at doors to events other people were running, giving brochures and laughs, but there was no heart. I understand now that I was walking into a community like the one I was leaving, riddled with grief, and that there was a giant emptiness that we were suffering and hadn't named yet as an order. So compassion helps me understand that wasn't exactly what was going on, but it was the feeling I had. And I have always taken as a sister my vows very seriously. And at the end of the day, people who say we're mocking nuns really don't understand. We're being nuns in the world, but in a different way. We're moving outside of the convent walls into the gutter, where most people really need to meet a nun, especially on a Friday night. And the vows we take are really to liberate the joy in every person we meet, and liberate the joy in our culture. And one of the ways we do that is we work hard looking this silly to take all the shame out of everyone's hearts, and to make room for joy, and room for individuality, and room for uniqueness, and room for new community. So a lot of the work in San Francisco for me has always been informed by that vow, to bring forth space for joy. And in my practice, I find it creates space in my heart for joy. That mindfulness and meditation for me open me up in ways where the world is always trying to close me down. And so my practice and my vows are the same thing for me. They reinforce one another. And it's an important part of my ministry in the world that I meditate on a regular basis, that I create space in my own heart for joy, because otherwise I've got bupkis when I'm talking to you. What I noticed in the last 6 or 7 years in the community here is that a lot of people are under stress. People are losing their housing. People have no health care. People are at risk of being deported. There are tensions over our different colors and where we come from and the languages that we use in our experiences. And within that, there has been a band of people finding meditation, but finding meditation through means that have always made me suspicious. Because as I listen to the mindfulness industry, those voices are very familiar to me. They're the voices of gay mass culture. They're the voices of addiction. They're the voices of shame that I have worked so hard to take out of my own heart and others, because they say, all that suffering we're working on, that's in your heart. It's your responsibility to have a practice to get the suffering out of your own heart. And so here is a self-help guide. Here is a discipline for $15.99 that I can show you in this video, in this CD, and this podcast, and I will help you Remove the suffering from your own heart. But as a queer person, I hear that and I think, you are shaming me. You are telling me it's my responsibility, it's my fault, that somehow all of this suffering I'm seeing in the world, I'm carrying? I'm impacted. I'm carrying this in my heart, but how dare you tell me it's my work alone? Because I look around and I see suffering being generated by this giant dukkha machine out there. Everything out there in this culture is extracting every ounce of joy and turning a profit. And it's killing my siblings. And so the first thing I want us to talk about when we talk about mindfulness is I want us to take the suffering out of our own hearts and put it back into the neighborhoods in which we live. Because if you get to this place where you think your suffering is so unique, it's isolating you. And your practice is something you do in your own bedroom quietly so you don't bother anyone. You've already lost. That means the McMindfulness culture has colonized your heart and filled it with shame and is actively getting you to collaborate in your own oppression. And I will tell you one thing about queer Buddhists. We know what oppression feels like, and we know how to walk away from it. And sitting together, we know how to invite other people to do the same and build community in that. So the first transformation is we have to realize that we are living in a toxic culture that is really coming after us. The second shift is, particularly in Western practice, that's how we see the Buddha. Alone. Meditating in peace. The Buddha, by the time he got to 45, most people think he traveled at least through 3 or 4 states of India. There was a professor in Madras who did a calculation. The circumference of the journeys that the Buddha made in his lifetime were over 200,000 square kilometers. The Buddha didn't live life alone. The Buddha was on the street. The Buddha was in the monastery. The Buddha was in the court. The Buddha was speaking to people of high birth and low birth in lots of different languages, in lots of different situations. The Buddha was out there, just like the sisters are out there, talking with people, listening to people. So our practice of mindfulness is automatically social, just like it was for the Buddha. And it builds community, not isolation. So as we sit here together as queer Buddhists sitting in a Sangha, I just want to celebrate the power that you have channeled here and the witness you're giving to the experience of the Buddha as something social, that our consciousness comes awake more when we are together than we are separate. And that's something I don't think, as queer Buddhists in San Francisco, we always really understand just how subversive that is. I mean, can you imagine 40 Buddhists sitting in the middle of Market Street and having 30 minutes of silent meditation? The city would totally come apart. We would have no idea what to do with that. That's because when we protest, we're used to rage and anger and the bullet, as Mary Media said. Sometimes, as the Democratic Party has so often done, turn it into a circular firing squad where we are attacking one another for our purity. Those are all external forces. Those are all distractions. What are the 3 sources of suffering? Greed, ill will, delusion. That's the market economy. That's the national policy of this government right now, isn't it? Distraction, ill will, greed. So right now it's a tough time for a lot of people and there's a lot of anxiety, but I want us to really feel empowered by the practice that we have here, because you are an antidote to that. And the last shift I want to ask us to make is, when people talk about mindfulness in isolation, they're turning it into a commodity, a technique. It's something that they can sell you, and it has no roots. If you're trying to live as a Buddhist in San Francisco all by yourself, meditating on a Tuesday night quietly so you don't bother anyone, that's assimilation. That's not liberation. That's trying to get more and more at peace with the stress in your life without really identifying where it's coming from, or how to fix it, or how to help other people who are also suffering. So I want us to realize that mindfulness is only one of 8 pieces of the Eightfold Path that all of us practice. And that if we bring it back into the Eightfold Path, where we're also thinking about our viewpoint, right? Death is not the end. Our actions have consequences. If we think about the fact that right speech is also part of mindfulness, what I say and what I do, the power that I give the kind of words, is it violent and coarse, or is it inviting and warm and welcoming? That makes a difference in the world in which we live. Livelihood, right livelihood is part of the Eightfold Path. A lot of us find mindfulness now at work. The HR department is suggesting we go to the course over lunchtime. Fabulous. Except I've experienced people at Google who do mindfulness who then begin to think about the fact that their platform promotes hate speech and want to talk about it at the next meeting. That wasn't what they were after. They wanted you to work 10 more hours that week without complaining and being upset. But if we situate mindfulness in the Eightfold Path, if we make it a razor sharpening our awareness, we don't need to be afraid of these forces. We see them for what they are. We identify them as the threat that they are, and we understand that we're not facing them alone. As Buddhists, we have to take this voice of shame out of our hearts. We had to do it to come out as queer people. There's nothing wrong with me being who I am. It's fabulous. We have to forget this illusion that the Buddha is sitting there alone in his bedroom on a Tuesday night. And remember the Buddha talking 200,000 square kilometers by the time he was 45. That's a lot of trips on the J line. Right? That's a lot of train rides back and forth to the East Bay. That's a lot of opportunities to have conversations and to sit and open our hearts with compassionate language, with compassionate ears, with compassionate speech. And we have to situate our mindfulness not in isolation, in coping, because the island of coping is impacted by the climate change of rage and exploitation. And every day, a little bit more of the coping coastline gets eroded. So ultimately, we're sitting on this little bit of land with oceans of rage and anger all around us, just praying if we're silent and meditate for 45 minutes instead of 30 minutes, we're just going to be fine with this. They'll leave us alone. That's not a voice that gets us anywhere. Not in our own practice, not as a sangha, not as a community, not as a revolutionary consciousness that Mary May was explaining, Harry Hay and others thought we really are. So, I'm grateful to be with you today, but I think the most important thing Mary Media and I can do is to listen to you, talk about where you are in your practice, to see if any of what we're talking about is resonating in your hearts, and to see if there are places where this is a challenge for you, where you find yourself on the coping island. Or maybe you see other people on their little archipelago, and you're trying to figure out how to reach out to them. So, if you're okay, I'd love to just hear from you about your practice, and let's talk.
Thank you for bringing this to mind. The past maybe year or so for me, I've been studying and practicing more in Mahayana traditions, which is a real shift for me from when I first came to Buddhism, which was much more through reading Noah Levine's book, Dharma Punks, and from his father and the Spirit Rock Theravadan practice and viewpoint, which is a very individualized, get yourself liberated first and then help others, and learning more the Mahayana approach, which is more your liberation is completely rests on benefiting others. It's emptiness and compassion together. And I've been in knowing this was coming today, thinking about who talks and what we hear in this space and what we talk about, and like, I can't think of the last time one of our speakers used the word love. And I'm like, wow, that's really intense. Like, I really can't think of a time, and maybe help me for those of us who come every week, who talked about love. And that's just like, why aren't we using that word more when we talk about our practice? Because I don't know who said it, but if it's like if a religion or practice isn't about love, like, then what is it really? And so it's gotten me thinking, like, just before you all come in here, it's got me thinking a lot about what we do here and who talks here and what we talk about, and so that I'm just talking, right? Not getting anywhere. But the other thing, so there's a practice in that comes from the 7 points of mind training of when you experience suffering. Like if you're mad, there's this practice of saying, like, my anger, I'm going to take on everybody's anger, because that anger is a veil to liberation. So, like, I'm mad right now. Instead of just being my mad, I'm going to be everybody's mad, and free everybody of that force that blinds them to their own liberation. And so let my anger right now be for the benefit of everyone else. So it becomes less of like, I'm so pissed or I'm so sad, but it suddenly becomes like it's the universal suffering, which is what I really appreciate you touching on that, of like in our own little bubble of our own suffering because of the oppression that we experience, or the sadness and suffering from the oppression is actually not really just our own. It's like this collective thing, and it's a very freeing way of getting out of our own heads and that woe is me, and start thinking more of like, how can I turn my own pain into like a more of a collective care, in a way that, and it kind of dissipates pretty quickly when you do that, which then gives us more, I think, for me, it makes me more available to be helpful to others, So thank you for that. This is sort of what you brought up for me.
Yeah, ditto, thank you for speaking some truth, and I really appreciate that. I travel a lot in India, and I often think a lot of what I see is really makes Marxist description of religion as an obedient people. There's a lot of that I see in Christianity. Any major organized religion is, losing touch with the spirit, or like the background, like you said, the roots of it. And for me, that's what my practice is about. Similar practice from Theravada Buddhism, but I also have a practice in Bhakti Yoga. Tradition of serving other people, and it's ideal for enlightened before we can go out to Krishna and do that. But there's also a way of serving that you get free while you liberate other people, by working on ways that we hold people in divisive categories and stereotypes and things, but we become really an instrument of liberation. It's really the way of being in the world. And that includes marching. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one of the wonderful things about being a sister is that you get to model community for people. I mean, a sisterhood is a spiritual community. And so we're drag queens can often be, seen as a little narcissistic, maybe, a little egoistic, but we're using the, components of drag, the elements of drag, in a way that models community, and that also, by going out into the community, we are not like separating from. We are engaging with people who see us as part of who they are. It's like, I could do that. It's like, is part of our way of connecting with people. It's like we're not making a separation. We're making the connection that we're all part of a unified whole. So I think that's one of the ways that the sisters can model liberation, and we're not asking people to cope with their situations. We're trying to recognize who they are and saying that there's no difference between us. We're all part of the same humanity.
There's one person in back first. Yeah.
Thank you for a really beautiful, articulate conversation. Very thought-provoking. I was wondering about this idea of your consciousness, and it was something that was really starting to blossom in the 70s, and that AIDS was so devastating and taking us to grief and killing off so many people who were contributing that to culture, and that in the absence of that clear consciousness, that might have been part of the arising from possibility. And I wonder if there's some context in which we can move from the political necessity that we've been all working politically towards marriage, etc. And if there is an opportunity now with fewer people dying to reclaim the role of their consciousness in culture.
Well, let me just ask, how do you experience that? Or other folks in the Sangha, what's your response to that?
I hope so. I'm a little adrift because I just moved to Los Angeles, and there is an RPG yet. And there are meditation centers that are basically a chain. And you pay $50. So I don't have a great answer to it. So I'm grateful for the thought provoking. I could take some responsibility for trying to create that in Los Angeles.
Looking at the comparison between an individual person and an entire culture, and a person, if he or she is an alcoholic or a drug addict, they can kind of skate for a long time with that addiction. And as I say, only when they hit rock bottom, when just things have just gone totally fucked up and there's no hope of being unfucked, do you get this transformation or this opportunity to get away from that addiction. And I think there's cultures like that too. Trump is not an aberration. He is the likely result of decades of Republicans getting more and more into extreme, hateful, policies and attitudes. I personally have been growing more and more optimistic in the past few months. I mean, just the election we had recently was a real fuck you to Republicans, and the election before that too. I think if the only way you can change significantly is if you're in a position of risk, and Trump could be re-elected next, and then the country would be destroyed. I mean, there is that risk. But there also is a risk of of a possibility of just total repudiation in the next election. And I belong to some kind of discussion. We need to listen to a podcast and about some philosophical or political thing and discuss it. And I expressed this optimism. It's like a group of people. Everybody else there was convinced that Trump was going to win the election. So I was really taken aback. I feel, well, maybe I'm just being some Pollyanna. I really don't know whether how I feel is an accurate reflection of that there's a possibility of a real transformation or whether we are just fucked in that, another 4 years of Trump will just do whatever vestige of the country will survive after this 4 years will be totally wiped away and make some cream forth as a fascist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know, I keep swaying back and forth from real hope and real optimism to profound despair. So, I don't know, that's just what I'm struggling with right now. And I'm sure, I know a lot of other people are in the same situation.
So I really resonate with that. Thank you for the honesty, and also for talking about the challenge of finding meditation in the chain world of LA. It's also like trying to find a gym or anything else in LA. Let me just reflect back some of what I'm experiencing in my own practice and see if it's helpful. So, ironically, one of the most powerful terms right now in our culture is to be woke. Have you all heard that phrase? And the justice warrior is kind of the icon of that, the person who is always at the ready to attack the unwokeness in others. For me, that's the same as McMindfulness. That's shaming people for not being fully liberated yet. And also, it's saying you have to be a better sibling. You have to be more perfect. And the point of my meditation is never to be perfect. When Mary Media talked about sisters as models, the fabulous thing is we are terrible models. You want to see the dysfunction in the community or how hard it is to get anarchists to talk together at the same time in a meeting? Watch a bunch of nuns on the sidewalk, right? It's impossible.
I'm not talking about our general meeting.
No, I'm talking about pretty much everything. But for me, there's a quality of freedom and emancipation in that. Because if I'm putting my business on the sidewalk, it's not like I have anything to hide. And if I can still have all my business on the corner, but still be practicing and becoming more awake and more attentive, I'm also taking the pressure off everyone else, aren't I? Because perfection and personal honing of my liberation is not the goal or the tool. I can still be a completely distracted and chaotic drag nun and wake up a mass of Buddhists on a Sunday. And those are not exclusive of one another. And this beautiful image you have of like balancing between hope and despair, well, that's what the Buddha teaches, isn't it? Life is always between these two things. They happen at the same time. It just depends on where your heart is captured. Right? But the thing about our practice is, like these vows that we take, it's not to make everything perfect. It's to create space. Right? What we're missing in all these conversations is space. Space to hear one another, space to accept ourselves as a starting point that's okay and compromise with another person. The more we come together in mindful practice as a group, the more we work on our own meditation and follow the Eightfold Path, our speech, our work, our effort, right? A Buddhist is in the world just like a nun is in the world. Right effort is nothing more than trying to reduce harm and create space for what? Harmony. Harmony is just a Buddhist word for justice. Right? Everyone has space to realize their potential. Doesn't matter your starting point. Buddhism has never been about what culture you come from. Sri Lankans are not better Buddhists than people from Minnesota. It's about how you practice. And so I think you guys are really waking something up in this group right now in this conversation that I really hope we continue to follow up. Because this is shifting. That's the shift that we need to do. Because even in this political conversation, I don't want to be partisan. I think Trump is the climate change of the political culture. He's the shrinking iceberg, making it clear we have a problem. But Joe Biden made his career helping banks get deregulated in Maryland. Hillary Clinton made $650,000 on speeches to Wall Street. I'm not saying there's an equivocation between the two. One is clearly, definitely Darth Vader. But the more we sharpen our attention, the more those distinctions are not a threat. the more we create space to maybe have compassion for someone who is so caught in rage and coarseness. You know, I mean, the beauty of Trump is he makes it obvious that coping is not a strategy, because every 5 minutes something else is coming out that's devastating. So you can't ever get into a position where your coping is going to handle all that, because he's going to blow it up by lunchtime. You know, he gets a head start at 3 in the morning on the crapper in D.C., 3 hours ahead of the West Coast. We're already deluged when we wake up. But as Buddhists, I think, isn't that the power? I don't have to worry about any of that. I'm not attached. I am in right consciousness. You know, prana at the end of the day is right consciousness. I am in alignment with the world around me in a way where I have no illusions anymore. It's all okay. I bring it all in. I share it with other people. We walk together and we make change because we strip down the greed. We rip apart the ill will and bind it back up. We find this compassionate place where we penetrate the delusion that is brought about by fear and shame and anger and scarcity. And we teach people that there's more than enough abundance of joy by modeling it in our fabulously flawed, accessorized imperfection.
I love your question about how does queer consciousness, how can we affect the larger culture? What do we have to offer? And I think one of the gifts of being a sister is we have access to all these different parts of the community, places. I get to see places that I wouldn't ordinarily necessarily go to on my own, and it's in that case a service function. I've recently been at a couple of events where we were selling raffle tickets. That was our role there. We were definitely just there as helper bees, kind of. But it was like for the Trans Lifeline Suicide Hotline was one of the organizations, and the other was the Transgender Law Center, who fights for changes in legislation as well as actually defending the rights of individual trans people. And the people who were at that event, I mean, it just kind of, the nun from 40 years ago to encounter these people who are just so comfortable in their in the non-polarity of their gender identification, in the fluidity of their gender, was just really inspiring to behold. So I feel that the change is already happening at the grassroots, and we've kind of given people the inspiration and the permission to knock down the walls of, conformity that we were born with, and people are engaging that in a creative, engaging identity in a much more creative, expanded way. So I think that it already is underway.
This is a topic I thought about a lot since months and months ago. Last year there was a talk, and the person talked about what are one of the pitfalls of American Buddhism is it just becomes simply another form of self-help, and I'm sort of willing to let people use it in that fashion. I think that's kind of, I don't know how that came off saying, but because it is so effective. I don't think it's that hard to flip it, because all you have to do is just remind it that it's not about just alleviating your suffering, it's about alleviating the suffering of all living beings. When you talked about mindfulness practice in the school, that was part of my pathway to this Sangha. Was I've been reading for a number of years Thich Nhat Hanh's writings, and especially his book The Heart of Buddhist Teaching, and then we started a mindfulness practice at the school, starting with the lower grades and integrated into the higher grades where there is really a high degree of stress. It's a private school, the stakes are high, there's a lot of stress. And just thinking back on that, yes, it's for the students to help alleviate stress and to cope. Also, I begin to see there's a little bit of classroom management. Let's ring the bell, and everybody kind of chooses to be present. But there's a little bit of that too. But it was starting a regular kind of meditation practice through that. That then when I Thich Nhat Hanh says it's the three jewels. You need Buddha, Dharma, but you need the Sangha too. You need to be part of the community. And so I Googled gay Buddhists, San Francisco.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I'm glad I did too.
I mean, you're speaking to something that's really important, and I want us to be aware and own that too. Like Sister May Joy be with you, who's one of our most amazing nuns, also practices. She has a phrase, self-care is sexy. It's a mantra she uses. She works a lot in the streets in the Tenderloin, Polk Gulch neighborhoods. And self-care is sexy. You're right. If that's the avenue by which you find your practice, that's great. I think the people who are pushing McMindfulness, who are exploiting it, well, they forget that after the 30-minute silence, those people are all going to be talking to each other. And there is the revolutionary subversion. I might be silent for 30 minutes, but I am focusing my attention. And then I'm going to go to brunch. And I'm going to have a focused attention when I'm having conversations with the other people who are just meditating with me. And the more we allow for that space in our conversations, the more we become an agency to say, this is not right. And I have the agency to fix that. It's okay that there are 30 people doing self-care in this room. It's really powerful when the self-care those 30 people practice together converges. And they say that I had to step over 7 homeless people to get here is not right. That offends me. I am upset by that. Those are my siblings. The Buddha asks me to bring them into my community. How do I do that? Well, you do meal service. You do community service several times. That's important to keep those connections. I think you guys had a booth at the Castro Street Fair not that long ago. No? Note to self for next Castro Street Fair.
We discussed it.
We'll just go together and sit in the middle of the Castro Street Fair for 30 minutes. Let them all figure it out. But that's what I mean. Like, we're not in this dichotomy. We don't have to be in conflict with one another. But we have to make sure that we're not isolated.
Well, we do a dinner for a homeless shelter once a month, and we've been doing that for about 25 years now.
Beautiful.
Well, one of the Buddha taught a lot of practices other than meditation, and one of the most foundational practices that he taught lay people was dana. And selling raffle tickets is dana, and contributing to shelters is dana. It's my understanding the reason the Buddha emphasized the importance of dana is because it takes it outside of ourselves. And he specifically wanted to make the monastic community dependent on the outside community. It cannot exist separately. So that's why dana was originally founded. And to this day, it's one of my favorite practices. To this day, the sanghas and groups that are based on dana are rejecting the fee-for-service economy. And you don't hear mindfulness people talking about generosity. That's not part of that program.
Or love.
Or love.
Or joy.
And I know the sisters do a great deal of what you do is based on raising money for groups of...
For makeup.
Thank you for carrying out that tradition.
I don't know that you intended this, but the next time I'm with Donna Sachet, I'm going to see the Buddha now. Because she's really doing Donna all the time.
I just want to make it up. We are at noon, so we should start wrapping it up. But I know that Jim had his hand up. So.
Hey, I just, you guys are very eloquent and provocative. One of the most interesting spiritual witnesses that I have seen lately is Nancy Pelosi saying she prays for Donald Trump. She believes in the power of love. As much as she wants to see him in prison, she still prays for him. I find that very compelling. And I find it very difficult for me to do tongue blood for Donald Trump. I basically don't do it. But I should. Because I do believe in the power of those practices for people who are clearly suffering. That man is in hell. He may have created it, but he's a picture of wretchedness. And anyway, I just throw that out. I mean, are we we do believe in the power of mind well addressed and well focused. And where do we only, well, who do we not share that with? Who do we specifically, and I'm totally guilty, and this is a note to myself, that I should be more mindful that these practices are not just words, they're ours. And what do I say? Know yourself.
Good. Thank you both very, very much for this today. We'll do announcements, and then our host, and then we'll do the dedication of merit. And so, are there any announcements?
As many of you know, next week is the memorial for Hal Hershey's passing, 3 to 5 p.m. at the SF Columbarium. The person facilitating the memorial service is interested in knowing how many people from GBF are coming. Could you, by show of hands, just raise your hand? Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And thank you all for all the survey responses. They're coming in very well. Yeah,
I have a quick announcement. Our book group meets today, and then we're reading Tommy Orange's There, and we're only reading half of it, or we're discussing half of it, or we're discussing it twice. So the next book group is the first Sunday of December, which I think is the 1st or 3rd. So if you were interested, I just want to let you know that the first Sunday of the month we're going to continue our discussion of, it's a great novel. So if you're interested, keep it in mind over the next few weeks.
I am your host, and I am your host. There are snacks. There is hot water for tea. And even better, there's tea for the hot water. When you're done with the cup, you can just put it in the sink, and I'll take care of it. Rumor has it that sometimes at 12:30, people meet, congregate outside, and go off to lunch. I will also be passing around the Donna Bowl, and Donna has already come up in conversation. It helps pay for the rental of the space. It helps pay for our speakers. It helps for the publishing of our newsletter, which goes out to particularly the prison community, and really has an incredibly positive impact on those people. And as well as the monthly Larkin Street dinner. And I think that, it might be nice to think about Donna and whatever you contribute today, but to also think about how can we be practicing Dharma outside of this space and having the sidewalks of San Francisco. So,
Let's start with today.
All right, so we'll stand. I want to ask if we could do something. If you know the dedication and merit in your mind, we could say it together. Some of you do memorize it. That'd be nice if we use our voices, like body, speech, and mind, and bring that. And I also want to ask if we could, when we're done, I'd like to ring the bowl 3 last times after the merit, and we just sit in silence for the sound of as a way of capping off the morning day. Standing, if that's okay with everybody.
And the speaker next week is Bill Weber.
Thank you. And next Sunday, Phil Weber will be the speaker.
I hear an echo.
It's a feat of engineering.
Okay, so if we know it, let's do it. So by the power and the truth of this practice,
May all beings have happiness and causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.